So we have already dealt with almost half of the poem. Now we are left with the fifth and the sixth stanza. In the fifth stanza, we have just dealt with the fourth stanza, which talks about the condition or the favorable condition of the free bird. Now we come to the pathetic condition of the caged bird. It says, the fifth stanza, "But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied. So he opens his throat to sing." So what do we see? The pathetic condition. The caged bird inversely knows that he is not flying in the sky. He knows that he is not free, but he is a captive, a prisoner. He thus stands on the grave of dreams. Why the grave of dreams? What is grave? Of course, it is the end of a person's life. Grave of dreams. And what is dreams? It's to start something new or fresh. So grave of dreams suggest that how the dreams of the caged bird just falls flat. It is no more there. He cannot dream because dreams itself feels like a grave. He knows his dreams of flying in a free sky or in a free firmament to experience freedom is futile. He had lost all hope of freedom. His shadow, just imagine the pathetic condition. He sees whom? In the narrow cage, you just see yourself. So as if your shadow is shouting on a nightmare scream. It just wants to break free from that nightmare. It's in the nightmarish condition because it is, of course, bound. Who does want to be bound? So it is more pitiable, more adverse than a nightmare. Nightmare itself falls short of this nightmare when you are restricted from your freedom. His wings are clipped, that we already know, and his feet are tied. It's a repetition. The figure of speech here is repetition. Why? Because these lines are repeated. Why Mrs. Angelou does that? It's repeated to state that pathetic condition. It just puts emphasis or stresses on the condition. So there is only little hope of freedom left. So the bird, even in this pitiable condition, opens his throat to sing. The bird wishes to travail against all adversities. It's a faint voice, but a kindling voice of hope in his song that reaches till the distant places. So this is what the fifth stanza look like. The fifth stanza, you have to remember, the first two lines are very, very important and gives a lot to the insight of the caged bird's thought process. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. Grave of dreams suggests how it knows that it is no more the power to achieve freedom. So feels like as if the dreams have ended. And is standing on the graveyard. His shadow as if is shouting on the nightmarish scream. And of course we know its condition. Its wings are clipped and its feet are tied. And what does it do? It opens its throat to reach out to everyone out there. Then comes the sixth stanza, the last one, which is a repetition of the first. The caged is not of the first, I'm extremely sorry, it's a repetition of the third. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown, but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill. For the caged bird sings of freedom. This is a refrain. What is a refrain? A repetition or recurring as a stanza. The refrain is just the recurrence of the stanza, justifies the bird's stout determination to keep going after his dream of freedom. Moreover, the caged bird chooses to say, as this is the only freedom that he gets, just to open his voice, that he can enjoy without any restriction. His wings are clipped, his feet are tied, but one thing is still optimistic. His throat is not choked. The desire to voice, the desire to express is not gone all over. This is something the poet felt at heart herself. And that's why she uses the title. I told you, it's a very, very subjective title. I know why the caged bird sings. It might be a message to raise our voice, to express ourselves as free individuals, not to be suppressed by domination, not to give up whatever the matter is like. In many ways, the poem I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings can be considered as the poet's personal expression. Maya Angelou can be regarded as the caged bird in the poem. Stanza in the poem is repeatedly mentioned to catch the attention of the readers. Why? Because she wants to just give the implication of how it feels like to suffer. The poem uses a metaphor to compare the caged bird to Afro-Americans fighting for the liberation, fighting for their equality during the civil rights movement. So this is what the poem, the title, the message, the theme, and of course the substance, the meter, the rhyme scheme, the techniques that she used are all about. Now let us get into a more in-depth analysis of the figure of speeches that she does use. So please have the poem right in front of you. The first that she does use several times, it's alliteration. Or what is alliteration? Or consonants. Repetition of consonant sounds usually at the beginning of the words. For instance, you can see that can seldom see through. First one, please note down. Can seldom see through. See seldom S and CS. Okay, SS consonant. Now next one, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. So shadow S, shouts S, and nightmare scream S. So this is alliteration. Now next one, the free bird thinks of another breeze. Free bird, bird B and breeze B, BB, so consonant. And the fat worms waiting, W, W. Fat worms, worms, W and then W. So this is what the alliteration is like. Next comes the personification. What is a personification? It's a figure of speech when abstract ideas and inanimate objects, that is non-living objects, are invested with attributes of living beings. For instance, his shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. Shadow shouting. It's a personification. A free bird leaps on the back of the winds. It's a personification. And of course, another thing that is sighing trees. Personification. Metaphor. Next comes metaphor. It's a figure of speech where the comparison is met, but it is not met very explicitly, means it is hidden. It's not done with the words like and as. So in this poem, itself is a metaphor. The caged bird is a metaphor for the poet herself. The caged bird represents the misery and the distress of all those African Americans who had to face the inhuman treatment during the apartheid movement. And next comes the hyperbole. Now what is hyperbole? It's an exaggeration of any fact fact or statement. So why it is done? It is done for the sake of emphasis, to give stress to the situation, not done just out of no reason. Hyperbole, I have like many people ask, what's the implication of hyperbole? Hyperbole is done just to increase the intensity of the poem. So here, the free bird dares to claim the sky is a hyperbole, as if it is trying to claim the entire universe. So of course it is a hyperbolic condition of its power implication. It is the confidence to claim the sky, hypothetically, isn't it? It does not really have the ability to claim the sky literally. Literally it's not possible. It's a hyperbole, as if its power is so at the peak that it wants to have everything all by itself. Now another usage that we have seen in this poem is repetition. Why? Because again, for the sake of emphasis, we have the stanzas repeated, refrains. Why? Because it talks about the pathetic condition of the caged bird, and of course to give more emphasis to the condition. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. Has been repeated. It speaks about the distressing condition of the caged bird. And we also have the allusion that I mentioned. And what is an allusion? It's reference to other works or cultures in literature, either in prose or poetry. Now our poet has borrowed the title of the poem from Paul Laurence Dunbar's poem Sympathy. The first line of that poem is quite alike to this. Excuse me. So this is the allusion. So this is what mainly the poem is all about. And if I talk little more about the themes, we have to understand the themes of the caged bird sings is freedom and confinement. Freedom that is talked about by the image of the free bird, and the confinement by the caged bird. And of course it talks about the one theme is freedom in alliance to confinement. Next, voice against injustice, and that's why the caged bird sings. The injustice was it was just kept imprisoned. And of course one theme is racism. Why? Because the black Americans were not given freedom, and this is what Maya Angelou does during the apartheid movement. She takes up her pen to write down, to voice, because the freedom of expression was curbed. And of course another theme is the autobiographical sketch of Maya Angelou's personal life. This poem is kind of an autobiography of Maya's life. I told you before also. She had to herself face a lot of discrimination, harassment, assault since a very early age. She belonged to the Afro-American community, and on top of that she was a woman. She was terrorized by the kind of oppression under which she was constantly living. It was not a very free, very peaceful condition. She felt like that trapped bird that could not do anything but to open his throat and sing. However, like the caged bird, she refused to give up. So at last, if it is asked to you, does the poem end on an optimistic note? No, my dear, it doesn't. Because it ends on the grave of nightmares. Graves of dreams. And the shadow shouts in a nightmarish scream. So it does not. But just quite contrary to that, Maya Angelou never gave up in her life. Excuse me. She continued to vote for freedom, and she ever continued to do that for all the voices were oppressed. So this is more or less the poem is all about. As I always say, please read the poem in between the lines, because this is one of the most beautiful poem that literature could ever produce to us. So read in between the lines, reflect on the lines, ponder on the thoughts, and please feel free to write down your comments. And I will be making a separate video based on your queries. And another thing to mention, I've got a lot of queries on bangle sellers, like specially concentrated on the form, the meter. I will be doing a separate video on that. Please be patient and please love literature and please read in between the lines. And we will be again meeting very soon. Till then, stay happy, stay blessed, love literature.